Welcome to the Theory of DFS podcast. I'm Jordan Cooper, the co-author of the Theory of Daily Fantasy Sports. It's a 15-hour audio DFS masterclass you can pick up at theoryofdfs.com. Join with me, special guest, since we're actually getting a Major League Baseball season this year. It's Derek Carty, the proprietor of the Bat, the most stupendous DFS MLB projection system ever. It's the most accurate, most prolific. It's the most everything. Season long, not season, month long, week long, day long. It doesn't matter. Cardi, you're back for another season. Were you a little nervous during the fact that the players there may not have been a season?
Yeah, I wasn't nervous for most of the offseason, and then they started pushing stuff back and stuff was happening, and I got a little nervous temporarily. But I mean, you knew there was going to have to be a season. I thought maybe they were going to have a shorter one. They're just going to cut out April or something, but it worked out. We have a full season. We get pushed back a week, which is fine. No big deal. And yeah, it should be a good one.
And in your projection system, the bat is the primary one that I use for MLB DFS. I mean, that's not the only one that I use, but it is the baseline. It's essentially the baseline of the projections that I use to build lineups for GPPs. And I use your stack tools, where you the 5-man, 4-man stacks, different values, everything like that. This year for the bat, I know last year you incorporated Statcast data. Is that no longer in beta anymore? Is that part of the bat X? Is the bat X now like properly? You're more comfortable to not call it a beta anymore.
Yeah, no, it's not. I mean, it's been a couple years now. All the tests, I mean, all the back tests when I built it showed it was going to be better than the original version of the bat. All the accuracy tests over the last couple of years with it have shown that. So yeah, I don't see any reason to use the original version of the bat at this point, because the Bat X is just that plus StatCast data, and it's better. So yeah.
Are you utilizing? I remember last year you said that it was primarily for the batters. You weren't using it as much for the pitchers. So is that changing this year? That where Statcast is incorporated into everything now?
It's not fully incorporated into pitchers yet. That still is coming. There's been other offseason projects I've been working on. We're going to have ownership projections this year, which will be nice. But StatCast for pitchers is not ready yet. It incorporates a little bit, like it accounts for velocity for fastballs. It accounts for spin rate changes for fastballs, but there's just so much to do with pitching. And there's just so much I want to put in there that's not in there yet. Tunneling and spin mirroring and, late break. And there's just so much stuff. But we just have so much more data for pitchers than we do for hitters, that it's an entirely new process that I need to build to make it work. And it's a lot more involved, a lot more complicated. It's there, it's happening, but it's not ready yet.
Well, I mean, also you have to be sure, because I mean, I've been using the bat for maybe 5 years, 4 years, 5 years. The pitching projections, I almost think are better than the hitting projections sometimes.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
right. I mean, a lot that it's scary how, like, I'm more likely using the bat projections compared to the rest of the industry, because obviously, as a full-time DFS player, I subscribe everywhere. So I see the projections everywhere else. And I also know that the amount of variables that you use for the bat are like 10 times more than any other place. So you're weighing ballpark factor a little bit more than other sites, or weather a little bit more. Like if it's a Wrigley game and it's 25 miles an hour to center field, it's basically anyone in that game has a median projection of 8 million points, right? Like, right. I mean, obviously around the industry, it's more also, but it's much more apparent there. And the pitching projections, I notice, tend to be more, I wouldn't call it contrarian, but whatever variables you're putting into pitching is typically dramatically different than the rest of the industry, where I'm sitting there and you're projecting some $7,200 pitcher to have more raw points than Garrett Cole on the slate, and he's going to be like 4% owned, and like yes, variance involved, anything could happen, and these are typically are higher variance pitchers. But I mean, there's so many times I'm finding these cheap pitchers with the bat to able to like pay up for like the premium stacks, where most of the field is looking at pitchers that are sub 7,500 on DraftKings, going like I don't want any of these guys, and they're just basically how do I find cheap one offs, right? That $2,700 leadoff outfielder, the Nick Martinis of the world, right? The guy that has almost no ceiling. People are jamming into their outfield spot just so they could play like Jacob DeGrom and some 9,500 Adam Wainwright or something. And then I'm finding, that obviously the I think the poster child for that cheap pitcher over the course of the past couple of years is what, Drew Smiley?
Yeah, Smiley's been that guy a few times, but it works out a lot of times, and I think it makes sense that the bat is higher on guys like that than other systems are. And it's not that it's like it's always high on Drew Smiley or any pitcher like that, just to use him as an example. It can be high on him relative to the field and his price tag when the matchup is right. And that's where I think the bat really shines, is that it incorporates so many different factors that, some people, or I'd imagine other systems, they're kind of just, when they're talking about matchup, they're talking about like, the season long stats of the opposing offense and maybe like a rudimentary ballpark factor or something. But like the bat is taking into account not the season long stats of the offense, but the underlying talent of each specific hitter in the lineup. So if like a star player is missing, like that's going to impact it. And it's coming up with like real good ballpark factors and real weather factors and umpire and defense and pitcher pitch framing and like everything else. So like it's accounting for all these different things, and any one of them maybe on its own can be like a smaller edge, but you stack a whole bunch of them together and all of a sudden a guy who would normally project, if you're just using one or two factors, for like 13 DraftKings points, well, maybe now he's projecting for 17 or 18 because he's got a few things working in his favor that others aren't considering. And now you have this guy who's projecting really well and no one's going to be on.
But on the opposite end of the spectrum, on the hitter's end, you always have the problem of, I guess I'm playing Rougned Odor at second base today again, right? But the thing about the hitter projection, I mean, all projections in general, but especially in baseball, is that the range of outcomes, especially on hitters, because pitchers, you have more events that happen throughout the course of the game. They're pitching 80, 90, 100 pitches.
Right.
Batters are like 4 at bats, 5 at bats, 3 at bats. That the variance between that, where a guy could have a great median projection, but the standard deviation between batters could be dramatic. So Rougned Odor could have a 9-point. He's batting 5th, right? And he's 3,200, and it's like
a crappy second base position,
right? A weak second base position, right? And he has a mean projection of 9. Like, the dude never scores 9 points. He's like, he never fucking scores 9 points. He doesn't get on base that often. He's either going to score a home run plus, a double with 2 RBI or something like that, or he's going to strike out 4 times. Like, so looking at someone like that, or Hunter Renfroe, those strikeout or bust, Joey Gallo tends to project, well, he's projecting 12 points mean. It's like, dude, it's going to be 0. It's going to be a couple of walks. He walks a lot, though. I get it.
Yeah.
But then you also have guys like, Adam Frazier projects for a similar amount at second base. And it's like, well, unless he's getting on base and getting a bunch of steals or stuff like that, like Adam Frazier typically, especially on a bad offense, probably doesn't have the ceiling often for 20, 30 points, while Odor does. And that's accounted for in the range of outcomes. So, like, I know if you're using the bat or any projection system in baseball for cash games, where you're trying to like maximize for that like 55th percentile outcome, like sometimes you take a lower mean projection just to get not wild players in your lineup. Or some people embrace that fact and go, I don't want to play the slap hitters at all. I just want to play 8 guys in my lineup that have a chance for a home run, because if one guy hits a home run, it makes up for the fact that another guy didn't. Especially in this 3 outcome type of baseball environment, the way it is. But I mean,
and you have so many slates for it to even out. Even if your guys aren't hitting a home run today, like, all right, so whatever. You have 179 other days where they can. It's It's not like football, where you only have 16 slates or 18 slates or whatever it was this year. And, it's just, you have a lot of them in baseball. But the way the sites create their scoring system really dictates this. A lot of times people are like, why does the bat love Rougned Odor? If you look at Fangraphs, the bat's projections are there. It thinks Rougned Odor is a below average major league hitter, and it has for a while. But his skill set is perfectly suited for the way we score points in fantasy, because home runs count for so much. He's going to project for a high medium because his skill set is just home runs.
Yeah, when he's $3,000. I mean, if it was 45, right? If he was 4,500 the whole year on DraftKings last year, like Odor, you would never make anyone's lineup with the bat because it's. But when you get a 3K hitter with his skill set, it's like all other 3K hitters are like light hitting catchers and shortstops that don't do much, and it's like, oh, I get to plug in an actual guy that could hit 30 home runs over the course of the year into my lineup rather than some minor league level hitter batting 8th in some guy's lineup.
The tough part with Odor, too, is he's always been playing in these great hitters parks. Like, he was in Texas when it was a launching pad. Then last year he signs with the Yankees, and it's like, oh boy, he's in this great park for lefty power. Of course, he's going to be projecting well in that amazing lineup. This year, though, he's on the Orioles. And as soon as it happened, I was like, no, not again.
Yeah, but the Orioles situation now, I think that an edge in the beginning of the season, because you came out last year, or was it the year before? Something that people aren't going to realize that the Marlins park isn't as dramatic of a pitcher's park anymore because they changed the walls and the dimensions for the Marlins. Too bad the Marlins suck anyway, but I mean, at least for visiting teams. But it seems like Camden Yards, like for some odd reason, they're moving what? They're moving one of the fences back 26 feet and making it a 6-foot fence. Like. Number one, what are the changes? And number two, like, why? Is the reason? Let me guess. Is the reason why because their pitching sucks so much that they're trying to avoid giving up so many runs all the time?
I don't think so, because like it would even out. The pitchers would give up fewer runs, but then the hitters would score fewer, or like it would balance on both sides of it. So I think it's because they think their team is more suited to this park, the way the team is built, and like the projections kind of bear that out. Like I have the Orioles projected for like a half a win more after this park change, which isn't really a lot. It seems kind of dramatic to me, but their stats guys seem to think that this is good for their team. So it is what it is. All we have to care about as fantasy players is what's going to happen in our game. And this is dramatic. This is the second biggest outward shift of fences in the history of Major League Baseball. The only time a team has moved their fences back more than the Orioles are this year was in like 1955 or 1956 Fenway Park.
I remember the beginning of that season. I did very well in DFS.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Then, right. Back in 1955. It was very, very useful.
But yeah, like this is a historically large change. So it's going to be a big deal. I mean, obviously we can never know for sure ahead of time, but just like based on kind of what we know about fences and how parks work, a change like this makes Orioles Park project. It originally was projecting as like one of the best home run parks in baseball. I think like the 4th best overall offensive park in baseball. Now it projects like neutral for both. So this goes from like a really, really good hitters park to like, I don't know, whatever a random neutral park is, Target Field or Nationals Park or like whatever. Like it's just going to be
okay, but it's not as dramatic as being like PNC or Oakland or Petco.
Yeah, it's not going to be like Pitchers Park. Yeah, it's not going to be that probably, but it's definitely not going to be an extreme hitters park.
So we're going to be less likely to when the Orioles Yankees play. It's less likely that we're going to be getting, a lot of, hey, Gleyber Torres, does it matter anymore? Does it matter if it's the Orioles, regardless of the park?
Yeah, the DFS players love their player versus team, player and ballpark bullshit splits. Like, they don't matter. They don't matter.
So is that what other changes in Major League Baseball? I know I saw, like, I'm a DFS player. So at the end of the day, baseball doesn't matter to me until like the day before like the season starts with the slate, right? So like I'm barely paying attention to who's on what team anymore. I mean, like once I've stopped playing MLB DFS, it doesn't start again until whenever. There is every park now going to have a humidor. I saw that. Does that matter?
Nowhere near as much as people are going to pretend like it matters. We saw a couple years ago when Chase Field added their humidor. The bat adjusted for it. It wound up being a big deal. Like it was this extreme hitters park that's basically become like a neutral park, which is what we projected it as. And so many DFS touts were like, no, this is fake. Like, let me tell you the real physics of baseball. It's like, dude, who are you? You have no idea what you're talking about. The first couple games that year were like offensive slugfests, and like touts were like taking victory laps, like, oh, ha ha, rumor door. Like it was fake. Like it didn't matter. And of course that wasn't the case. It was a 2-game sample size, and then things got normal the way it should have been. But I think a lot of people now, I don't know, maybe because they didn't react strongly enough to the last one, or maybe because the last one wound up being such a big deal, people seem to be making a big deal out of this humidor stuff. And so I think that's going to give us potentially an edge in DFS, because I don't think people understand the way a humidor really works. And to talk about it in like the simplest terms,
Doesn't a humidor heat the balls? Doesn't it heat your balls?
it doesn't really heat your balls. It is a way the balls are stored. So
Okay.
it's more about like, I guess the simplest way is to say like applying water to the balls. So it's either like removing or adding moisture, water to
It's
the balls.
humidifying or dehumidifying your
To make
balls.
them, to make them like heavier or lighter, essentially. And it's
Well,
more
from my
complicated than
my
that, but
experience, typically humidity makes the balls looser.
um,
Makes
yeah,
my balls looser at least. That's the point. That's all I know, right? So if
yeah.
it's not,
So
if it's really dry, typically your balls kind of shrink up, right? You get some shrinkage there.
yes,
Is a baseball similar to a scrotum?
I have no comment on whether
What is what
baseball
is
is
the what
similar.
is the what is the scrotum correlation to the baseballs?
Jesus. Yeah.
You know
So
I have to title this episode "Scrotum Correlation."
that
Just
that's gonna bring in the views.
right. Well, the SEO value of people. Hey, people may be looking up. Hey, I need to know. I'm looking up nude pictures of Derek Carty, but
Oh
just the
yeah.
scrotum. I just want to know his scrotum. It's the scrotum size. Scrotum
But yeah,
correlation.
before the humidors in Coors and Chase Field, both of those cities are very dry. Humidity is always very, very low, and so the balls are dry. And so when you put the balls in a humidor, you add moisture to the ball, they become heavier, and offense goes down. Um, the the difference between the humidors in Chase and Coors, though, is that those cities were so dry to begin with, and the storage conditions for those balls were so dry to begin with, that going from that to 70 degrees, 55% humidity in the humidor was a big change. Most parks, though, are already around 55% humidity. So adding a humidor to a ball that's already been stored in like 55-ish degree percent humidity for the past several years isn't going to make any difference. It's the same thing. It's just standardizing it across baseball, maybe tiny differences. But the biggest problem is we don't even know where the balls were being stored previously. Were they at the exact same humidity of, the outside weather of that city? Were they in a room where the humidity was, maybe up a little or down a little? Were they stored in like a damp basement? Like, we don't know the previous storage conditions, so we can't really know what these new humidors are going to do, especially when the average conditions are pretty close to the humidor conditions anyway. I think the only parks that we might see a predictable impact in, unless somehow we get a report that says, okay, these are where all the balls were being stored in every park previously. And if we had that, that would be great. We could calculate some real stuff. But if all we know is just like which cities are the most humid or the least humid, San Diego is the most humid. San Diego is the only park, I think, that is really significantly above that 55% threshold. It's about 70% humidity in San Diego. San Francisco is about 65%. So we could see a little bit there maybe. but San Diego in particular would be the one. And it would have the opposite effect of Chase and Coors Field, where we saw offense go down, because essentially for Chase and Coors, we were adding moisture to the ball. In Petco, because it's on the other side of the spectrum, we would be removing humidity from the ball or moisture from the ball, and offense would go up. So that's the one that I want to look out for. I'm debating whether or not to try to make a little bit of an adjustment in the bat for it. Again, we have imperfect information, and so it's tough to know. We don't know how they were being stored in San Diego previously. So I am looking into some things, but that's kind of the rundown on the humidors. Everyone's going to be like, oh, these humidors are such a big deal, and people have tried to make a big deal out of it. The last couple of years when they announced, like 3 humidors in like Miami and Toronto or whatever. But really for most parks, it's not going to matter at all.
Is there anything else that is changing this year? Ball-wise, field-wise, rules-wise, anything? I mean, they're not banning the shift yet, so I mean, none of that is changing. Yeah. Is there anything that you noticed that is going to impact projections in certain places or just overall in general?
Yeah, so 7-inning doubleheaders are gone, so that'll be nice.
Well, that'll save the headache from a DFS from a DFS perspective of number one, not having to go like, well, obviously the hitters in this game are like losing at bats probably. The pitcher is more likely to get a complete game because of it's only 7 innings, but also the headache of having multiple slates on a day and which games are on what. I know from your perspective, loading stuff into Lineup HQ and on Roto Grinders, and probably across all sites in the industry, this one's a doubleheader, and this one's part of that slate, and this one, that's going to kind of go out the window, so we don't have to worry about those anymore.
Yeah, so that should be nice. We have Universal DH coming back. We had that temporarily in 2020 during the shortened COVID season, and then it was gone last year. And now it's back this year. So I think that's definitely going to give us an edge, because anybody who's just looking at raw stats especially for pitchers, they're going to have an imperfect idea of who the pitcher is, because last year National League pitchers got to face a pitcher, in the batting order, every 9 batters or so, and their stats are going to look better because of that. And so this year, everyone's going to be on the same playing field. And I think a lot of projection systems are going to have a difficult time kind of adjusting for it, because we've had so many different baselines the past 3 years of, okay, no universal DH, no universal DH. And this year we have it again. So it's a lot of kind of moving parts, and it's something that the bat is really well equipped to deal with, because the way the bat works is, it just does this automatically. It doesn't care if there's universal DH or not, because when it estimates a player's talent level, it looks at every single at-bat or, plate appearance or batter faced or whatever for a pitcher that every player has ever taken, and the context of it. Okay, it was in this park, and this was the weather, and this was the umpire, and this is the opposing pitcher or hitter. And it basically says, okay, well, the conditions here were really good or really bad. And then it basically adjusts the player's stats for, how easy or hard the conditions were. So it knows already exactly how many pitchers in the batting order every pitcher in the entire league has faced. Maybe Jacob deGrom last year faced, 9.2% of his batters were against opposing pitchers. And maybe for Max Scherzer, it was 10.6% or whatever it is. It knows exactly the amount, and it's already adjusted for it. And so it already has a neutral understanding of who every pitcher is, regardless of the opposing batters, which is really nice. So from there, once you have that baseline where everyone's just the same, the competition doesn't matter, then you just project them against that day's lineup, and every day's lineup is going to have a DH in it today or this year.
But as a default, one would expect that in the beginning with less data in the beginning of the season, especially, that the pitchers that have been in the National League the past 3 years in the bat may possibly project lower than you expect.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we're seeing that with season-long projections. I'm getting all the time, why does the bat hate Walker Buehler? Why does the bat hate this guy or this guy? It's like, well, he was in the National League last year, guys. Like, there's a DH now. Like, he's going to get a little bit of a hit from that.
Right, so his strikeout rate's going to go down.
Yep.
Right, I mean, and more runners possibly on base. I mean, his ERA or Sierra, whatever, goes up. His xFIP goes. I mean, like, how, to what extent? Probably not where it's like, oh, Walker Buehler is now a fourth star. Like you're not to that level. It's just that on a given slate in the, like, especially in the beginning of the year, where people are heavily weighting last year's stats, and they'll go, well, it's like, well, I'm going to play Corbin Burns for 11,000, and the bat may have you Darvish and Corbin Burns like nowhere near as projected as like Shane Bieber on the same slate, because it's like, well, they're going to have to face an actual batter now than kind of a free strikeout or a free bunt sacrifice out or something like that.
Yeah.
It may not be dramatic, but in DFS, we care about on a day-to-day basis, we care about the margins.
Yeah, even a point or two difference, especially when you're trying to decide between the aces up top, like it makes a difference. So the bat is going to be accounting for it exactly correctly, and I do think the field is going to be trying to kind of eyeball it and estimate it, and probably not doing as good of a job.
So as far as the field is concerned, this is going to be the first year that you're going to be offering ownership projections with the bat. Now, it used to be that, you got RG ownership projections. You got roto grinders. And there was some confusion behind that, because I don't think technically you were supposed to with just the bat if you didn't have a roto grinders premium subscription, and then people got it anyway, and then it got taken away, and then people are like, why are you taking it away? It's not part of the bat. You never did ownership projections. But obviously, instead of having people have to pay for the bat and then also have to pay for ownership projections, it makes more sense to do them yourself. But as someone that doesn't come from a GPP background, I'm not saying you don't understand the math and the game theory behind it. How are you projecting ownership, first of all, as a methodology? And secondly, how are you avoiding, or maybe you're not, the fact that, like, just because you can't project Ruden Odor as 24% owned and Drew Smiley as 32% owned, because your projections has them at the best values. The rest of the industry doesn't. So That's a bad ownership projection. So how are you coming to your ownership numbers, and how confident are you going to be that you're able to project ownership at least within the realm of accuracy as everyone else in the industry, where it's not, I mean, owner projections are tough, right? Because you're dealing with human biases, and also people looking at the same information that, oh, this guy's going to be under-owned, and then all of a sudden they're over-owned because everyone saw, because according to all my information, he was only going to be 8% owned, and now he ends up being 16% owned because everyone saw it. Like, how do you avoid that pitfall? And it is the ownership projections almost tougher to do than the actual player projections.
Yeah, so there's a lot to unwrap there. First, Ruden Odor, Drew Smiley, not going to be projecting for high ownership unless the field is actually going to be, trying to roster them. And we wouldn't want it to be that way. Like, ideally, you use ownership, you compare it to a projection, and you find which guys are going to be, under-owned relative to the field. If the ownership projections are based on the actual performance projection, well, that kind of defeats the purpose. It's a completely different system from the actual player projections. It's not trying to say, okay, the bat likes Ruden Odor, so everyone else must too. Like, no, it's going to realize that everyone else doesn't. And
but where's that rate? So how are you able to, for instance, like my manual way is I look everywhere, so I could see all the projections of everywhere. I could go, well, I'm using these projections, and this is the only system that is enough. Like if you were using this, he'd be 20% owned, but accordingly, he's probably going to only be like 8% owned or so. Like, I do it really blunt and estimated way. I may run 300 lineups with different projections sets and go who comes up more than others and then compare them and then adjust the ownership from there manually. It won't equal the right number. I mean, like, I'm not trying to be precise. I'm just trying to be as accurate as I can. Like, the difference to me between 1% and 2% ain't a big deal. Difference between 24% and 26% ain't that big of a deal. But I don't want to have a batter at 18%. I say it's going to be 18% owned. He ends up being 6% owned, and vice versa. So, are you looking elsewhere? I mean, like, I don't see how that process happens, because you go through the bat and you project some whoever to be like, well, this guy projects, it's some 54, it's a high price, it's Bryce Harper or something like that. And it's like, well, he only projects for like 11 today, right? So, like, and it's a 14 game slate and something, and he has a good matchup. He's in a decent ballpark, but for whatever reason, like Juan Soto is better. There are tons of guys in that range that project for 12 or 13 points, and you're like, well, 2% owned. Who's playing Bryce Harper today? But you look around the entire industry, and it's like, well, he's facing some righty that's bad at the pitch type people, and it's 92 degrees, and they come up with the whole way where Bryce Harper should be like 2 points high. Like, other systems have him higher projected than those other batters in that range, and he ends up being like a chalk one-off at like 18% owned because of that. Like, without looking elsewhere, unless you're telling me you are, how do you take that into account into your ownership projections?
Yeah, so it's important to understand that we're never going to get 100% accuracy on anything. Player projections can't, ownership projections can't. We're trying to be better than the next guy. I'm confident that these ownership projections are going to be better than whatever else is out there. I think there's a lot of good stuff going into them. Some of it is black box type stuff I don't want to talk too much about. There are some, industry type factors that helps you figure out, okay, like, this is a guy that the industry in general is high on today.
Is that something you're putting in manually, though?
No, it's all going to be automated.
Okay, so how would you know that the industry is high without?
I don't want to talk about the exact process behind it, but there is going to be some stuff like that in there. It is going to consider slate dynamics. So if it's a slate where, like, there's just a lot of really, really good high-end outfielders, like, maybe the ownership's going to be split up on them, or maybe it's, it's a really tough, slate for shortstops where there's just a whole bunch of bad guys and one guy who's really good. And so that guy's going to carry more of the ownership. The model is not done yet. I should say it's not done yet. It probably will not be done on opening day. So it's going to start out, anyone who subscribes is going to get Roto-Grinders projections starting on opening day. And then as soon as this is ready, it's going to be worked in, hopefully, sometime in April, by the beginning of May. We'll have to see, but it's coming along. So the model's not done yet. So I don't know exactly what it's going to prioritize, but I do have a ton of variables that I think are important and are going to go into the model. And the model is going to determine, okay, this is important to this extent. This is not as important. This doesn't matter at all. But it's going to consider lots of stuff, kind of those industry factors. It's going to consider recent ownership. Was a guy high owned last time? Was he a high owned guy and busted? Now everyone's like, oh, I want to pile off this guy. So it's going to consider stuff like that.
How about does it consider ownership if the game is questionable to play?
Okay, so that's one of the things I'm working through right now. Are you talking about weather?
Like that Roth has it as a yellow. It's going to be, or the different types of delays. Like, it's going to be a late start at 7 and probably doesn't start playing until 9. But there's still even if you do those types of things, even if you just put in like a rain chance, like a percentage of the time that it actually rains out and what the field thinks it's going to rain out, and then because we have some situations where, like Boston especially, like it's looking iffy in Boston. It's 2 crap pitchers, and I'd love to play the Twins Red Sox game with a 12 total in Boston. at 94-degree weather in July. But it's pouring at 7 o'clock. But the radar looks good at 9 o'clock. So will the field hold up? And if the field holds up and they play at 9, I'm hoping to get these stacks there at like 3 times less ownership than you should be getting them if it didn't rain at all. But you still have to factor in that there is a risk that 9 o'clock comes around and they just say, fuck it, we ain't playing, and your lineups are dead. Like if you took out the rain factor, you would have, the Red Sox stack at like 15% owned, but you add the rain factor in and maybe the Red Sox stack comes in at 5% owned. And that should be and then you obviously have to move all the other percent to like every other batter and pitchers and everything like that. Are you, it seems like you will also have some type of way of gauging that.
Yeah, that's actually been the hardest thing to model right now. I'm still in the process of coming up with a good solution for it, but I understand that I need to. So I have some ideas. I think something like that will be in there, but it's not concrete yet. But yeah, I know that's a big one.
How often will ownership run? Because the player projections you have running on like 5-minute intervals.
It'll probably run on a 5-minute interval as well, because some of the factors will change every 5 minutes. If lineup position is going to be in there. If a guy, who normally bats ninth is all of a sudden batting leadoff, well, the field's going to see that. They're going to pile on him a little bit more, and the ownership's going to change because of it. So yeah, I think that'll probably, I would imagine it will update every 5 minutes as well, using, updating that type of information, as we go. And some of the information static, it's going to be there at the start of the day. Just the player's underlying level, what he's done this year overall, that's going to impact, the field knows Walker Buehler is a better pitcher than Drew Smyly is. So like, you need a factor that tells the system, okay, Walker Buehler is a better player than Drew Smyly. He's going to be higher owned. So we're going to have that in there. We're going to have recent performance because people love their recency bias. Lots
BVP.
of
Do you have an anti-BVP bias? Because the people with BVP get higher owned slightly, because even though it doesn't matter, like I could think of all these types of things of where if you listen to shows, you could see the bias, but what you're trying to do is to automate it. And I hope I know you're saying it's a black box, but I'm pushing you on all this type of stuff, especially since it's the forefront of how I play DFS is all based on what the field is going to do. And in my opinion, some automated system, which I can't create myself, not in the extent that you can, the black box would be, the black box, if you want to say, is that, well, I subscribe to all these sites, and I have a gauge of how certain sites impact ownership, and depending on the field, of the large field, small field, stuff like that, that I basically grab all of their projections and run, and they have their own ownership, right? And you're taking all of that data from elsewhere, because that's what other people are looking at, and then incorporating that into all your things. I'm not going to say that that's your black boxes. I have no idea what it is, right? But that's what I would do, because if you're telling me that it's an automated system, I would think it would be required. Why wouldn't you want what other people? It's the same thing of when people ask me, why do you subscribe to all the sites, even though you work for Roto Grinders? It's like, as a DFS player, the more information that I know someone else is looking at, even if I think the information sucks, is valuable to me, because I want to see where, if in football, if someone's this site has some running back 8 points higher than the blitz has, right? And no other site has them 8. Like, it's like, that's the outlier. And I'm like, oh, well, I also know that site may impact ownership by, a factor of 0.4 or something. That's like, this running back ain't going to be 8% owned. He's going to be like 14 or 15% owned. And I'm playing even less of them now, right? Because now they become even more overowned. So I think, are you saying black box? So you're not saying because you're grabbing projections from around the industry, and you're calling it the black box?
Anything. All I'm saying is that you're right. It does make sense to try to account for what people are looking at and what their biases are. So like, if we think BVP drives stuff, BVP will be thrown into the model. If we think people are looking at different things, like, it's just
Are you going to be back testing those types of variables? Like really, that's even the better way of doing it. To look back and you regress all the data. You go, well, take a look at all of these variables and go like, what affected ownership more? And like, here's something that you would consider to be like insane BVP, right? We have a Choi against Cole, right? Right, G-Man Choi always kills Garrett Cole, right? And then you all of a sudden you see ownership go like that on that slate. It's like now you could kind of gauge where BVP changes ownership more often.
I don't think I said, but that's how the model is going to work. So I have all historical stats and data and everything.
Do you have historical ownership also?
Compared to historical ownership on the slate, so I can see what actually drove ownership on every slate.
Oh, so you have the for both DraftKings and FanDuel?
No, so not FanDuel.
Right. Okay.
FanDuel
so DraftKings.
FanDuel doesn't let you have that data. So FanDuel's model is going to be a lot more basic.
Okay, but on DraftKings, essentially, so you're telling me part of the black box. I'm opening up the little black box. I'm just looking at the. So you're going back to 2016. Ownership and what happened on slates and using all of that data and everything like that.
I'm just basing it on last year. I mean,
okay, but I mean it's some amount of data.
A lot since then. I think actually relying on more recent data is the right way to do something like this. But yeah, it's looking at past slates, who was on the slate, what the dynamics of the slate were, what what the player had done recently coming into that slate, what he'd done, in a longer term sense, like all these different things, and it's looking okay. These were all the things that we knew about the player going into the slate. And this is what his ownership actually was. And it's looking at that for every player on every slate. And it's trying to figure out, okay, which of these things matter the most? Which of these things really drive ownership?
But with the rainout stuff, I mean, you're going to have to adjust for that as well.
Yes. So
now I can see how that could be a problem because you go, what? This guy was rejected for 14 points and got 0 ownership. It's like, yeah, because the game was rained out, and that's the reason why they weren't owned. It wasn't any type of like talent level or matchup level. It's like literally the game did not happen.
Yeah, so we have historical weather forecasts. There was a 60% chance of rain for this game, but like it gets complicated because like maybe there was a 60% chance of rain at game time, but it was going to clear out within a couple hours and nobody was worried. So I asked Kevin Roth if he had like a historical archive of his red, orange, blue, or not blue, but of his, color coded things. I'm like, that'd be perfect if I could just build that right in. He does not. He said they disappear after every day. So I don't have those, but I do have some ideas for how to incorporate this. But it is, again, trickier because it's more of an art, that type of thing, it's like you said, like, well, this game, maybe it's just going to play in a couple hours, or maybe it's the Washington Nationals and you just never know. And they're going to just call it off because like there's a lot of uncertainty with that type of stuff.
I know, but also in the past stuff, you don't sometimes the day after you remember the context of a slate, but do you remember the context of a slate from last April? It could be like, well, why was the ownership off over here? It's like, oh, well, the Dodgers, Kershaw was supposed to pitch, and an hour before the game, he was moved, and Kershaw ended up being 8% owned and gotten 0 points. And then because there was, and that changes kind of the context of everything looks kind of off if you viewed it as it was like this at 7:00 Eastern. But we have some slates where a pitcher gets scratched and it's a bullpen game, or the Dodgers, the Justin Turner gets scratched at 8:30 at night, and whatever Josh Donaldson in the 9:00 game, now his ownership goes up to the roof because everyone's swapping off a Turner, and it's like from a statistical standpoint, it looks like Josh Donaldson is way overowned, but it's like, well, no, because that wasn't the Dodger lineup at the time, and all the other third basemen from the earlier games couldn't have been rostered because obviously the games were locked.
Yeah, and those type of little rare kind of micro understandings of it. I mean, they're not going to be fully accounted for. Obviously, a guy gets scratched at 9:00 and the ownership all jumps off of him to somebody else. Like the system probably won't pick up on that.
But it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen frequently enough that'll
Exactly.
do like it'll make everything out of whack.
That's exactly it. Like even when we're looking at past slates, there's going to be a small handful of slates where something like that happened. It's not really going to impact the model at all. It's going to get washed out because we're dealing with such a big sample of baseball slates that those kind of things are rare. So it's not going to make a big difference. But again, like anything else, like it's going to be a projection. It's not going to be gospel. It's going to be, I think, really good. I think it's going to be better than whatever other projections are out there. But use a little bit of common sense when you use it yourself also.
Now that you're doing ownership projections, I'm not saying this year, but do you think in 2023, or maybe this year if you want, but I'm guessing next year, will you then be able to do simulations?
Simulations.
Contest-based simulations.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it, but
why wouldn't you think about it? It's the Holy Grail. What are you not thinking? If you did,
I'm focused on one thing at a time. I'm trying to build out these ownership projections, and then after that, I'm thinking, okay, I got to build out, like Slate IQ type,
Well, that's what I'm talking. But that's what I'm talking about.
Okay.
So but what you would be doing essentially from a high level view is using your ownership, right? Your own ownership to build and obviously you have to put in constraints where it's like most they're not just using 25,000 in salary. Most of these lineups don't have all one-offs. It's mostly stacks. Like you have to put some constraint, and you're trying to basically recreate. If it's on DraftKings has a 40,000 entry contest, you're basically saying, based on my ownership, how do I get to these ownership numbers with these stacks and everything like that to create the 40,000 lineups I believe estimated would be in this contest, right? And then you take those lineups and then you run a simulation of your exact player projections, the correlation between the play, and run them out, and then each lineup to the payout structure of the contest, right? It's a 50,000 a first. The first simulation, this lineup won first, this lineup won second, this lineup all the way down to the bottom, and then you'd run it again and again and again, and you divide that number and you get an ROI, an EV number compared to everything. And then you're able to also, after 10,000 sims or 100,000 sims, say, what percentage of the time is this player in the winning lineup or in the top 1% of lineups, in the top 10% of lineups? What stacks? 5-man stacks, 4-man, like it's the slate. It's Slate IQ, but you're doing it on a lineup level, and then once you're doing it on a lineup level, you've essentially, you could basically sell the bat and go, it'll simulate what the most profitable lineups in the simulations are, and then you could just choose 150 of those, and hopefully no one duplicates you, right? And
yeah.
But you may come out, there may not be a top 150. They may be, here's 17,000 lineups, right, in comparison that have a similar expected value. And it's like, if you're playing any one of these lineups into that field, and then obviously the second step would be not just large field. You'd be doing ownership for the smaller field. Like, you could go down the rabbit hole with this type of stuff. But
I know.
But the fact that you're doing, like, the first piece of thing that you need to do is the ownership piece. And I know, Carty, you have the skills to do what I'm talking about. You just needed that ownership piece to start with. So, like, I'm looking way past this ownership black box and going, how could we make it so that charging $400 a season for the bat would be criminally underpriced? Because I think it's criminally underpriced as it is now. And I almost say that as a selling point for people that want to get the bat, which is rotogrinders.com/the-bat. To me, it's not like even it's for like what 150, 200 slates, showdowns. I mean, like dude, like the entire baseball season for $400, like seems nuts that it's that cheap. So
it's way too cheap.
It's way too cheap. You even know it's way too cheap.
Yeah.
But you do it anyway. I don't know why.
Yeah. I don't know.
But if you add that type of stuff that I'm talking about, the more stuff you add, like to me with the owner, like did you raise what was it 300 last season?
It was.
Okay, so it is. So okay, so you did increase the price.
We did increase the price. Yeah. I mean, not to the, I mean, I get users all the time, charge $3,000 for the bet. Like, and like, it's tempting to do that, but I don't know. Like, it seems, like a big jump, and I don't want to alienate people who've been, around and using it for a long time. And, I think this is a pretty reasonable jump this year.
Right, and you're getting but you're getting the ownership projections with it.
Yeah.
Right,
Exactly.
so that's that. I'm just trying to figure out, like, it's like, okay, you raised the price, but you're adding something also.
Yeah.
So like, I don't know. To me, this is like a no brainer. 400. I mean, like it's a cost of doing business. But I understand your point. If you're someone out there that is playing, baseball 5 days a week, right? Maybe not all 7 days a week, and you're playing like $100 to $200 a slate, type of thing, like $400 divided by 6 or whatever is what, like 65, 75, $70 a month. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
you're reasonable enough if you're playing $200 a day to play. If you're playing 150 lineups into the mini max and you're playing, like, it makes it reasonable enough. But like for someone like me, and I'm not even the highest of volume of players. I may be playing $1,000 to $2,000 anywhere, depending on the size of the slate. Like, to me, $400 is like that's why I say it could be $4,000 and it would still be worth it for me to use.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of people who feel that way. It's, I get torn different ways every year. So it's trying to find a good balance.
Well, it comes down to, would you rather if you charge $4,000 for it, you'll have way less users, but how many more users will you have? Like, it's like you charge 10 times as much. Do you have 10 times less users? And also, from a business perspective, I can understand that spread diversification, right? Like, from a risk standpoint, you'd much rather, if you're just maximizing risk and don't care about the return, rather have 500 people that subscribe at this price than 50 people that subscribe at a price 10 times higher, because every one person that you lose or gain is a bigger swing. All right.
Yeah,
and then you also have 50 people that are like, no, we're the most entitled people in the world. And, if shit doesn't get updated 2 minutes before lock, you're going to be hearing from us. Right. and losing a bunch of people is going to matter a lot more. I'm not saying that you're going to lose people,
Right.
but like, you'd much rather have, I'm talking purely on a business perspective,
Right.
that I'm like, it's weird to say that you should be charging more, but I understand why you're not. And that's not like that doesn't take away the value of the product you offer. You know how much it's worth, how much it should be worth. You should be
Yeah.
charging
Should
just
be charging a lot more.
right,
It's
a
just,
lot more. But do you want to have
there
a
isn't-
cut? Let's say you charge $20,000. You probably would get 10 people, right, to pay you that, which is a nice $200K take. That's pretty good living, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, now you have to cater to just 10 people. And it's like, one of them gets mad at you for any reason, or just like, I decided not to play MLB DFS this year. It's like, that's 10% of your income.
Yeah.
Right? It's very in the marketing and advertising industry, it's very simple. Like, I was the type that I rather charge less and have like 15 clients than have 3 clients that I charge 5 times more for, because marketing departments change all the time. Or some new person comes in, we're getting rid of you. And it's like, that's a third of my income, and now I have to find a new client. Like, I'd rather not be put in that situation.
Yeah, having more like that definitely does lower the risk. And if you're going to have fewer clients, take on more risk, charge more, you need to, I think, make a good amount more as well. So there's going to be kind of a point of diminishing returns with it. There's going to be kind of an equilibrium point where it's like a good balance of like raw money, number of use. It's there's a lot to it. It's not like I know I have the right answer here. And the product, I think, is certainly worth way more than I charge for it. But
You should do no, what you should do next year is do a premium version. Okay?
I mean, if I were to build this simulation thing, like you're
Right.
saying, I could definitely see doing, okay, there's a version for it. You get all these simulations and all this crazy stuff, and you got to pay $5K for it, or like whatever it would be.
Right. But I'm saying like whatever the bat is, maybe the bat X or whatever is large field ownership projections, right, for DraftKings and FanDuel and the like whatever you offered this year, that's what you get. And then maybe next year it's like, well, you also have ownership projections for like all the different types of, like, if you want the ownership projection of the whatever small field 777, if you want the like, and you have all of that, and it's like you have like 4 different levels of ownership type. If you want the ownership projections of the showdown slates of the like of all this of everything, and then plus the stack simulations of all this, like, then it's like, okay, that's $4,000, right? Like you have like if you want that, it's whatever. Right. And then obviously you want to, if you're going to do all that work, you still want to make sure that price point covers it worth you doing. But like, I could see you doing something like that rather than, because if you added all that type of stuff, like $400 would be like,
no, it would have to be.
I mean, that would be stupid.
It would take to do that. Like that's an insane thing to do. It would have to cost like way more.
Well, I mean, because you'd essentially be doing what a lot of some of the top GPP players currently do.
Yeah.
You'd essentially be handing, here's a box on how, of almost the exact way that some of the most profitable DFS players actually play. And I'm just going to hand it to you.
Yeah.
But I said that to Justin at Run the Sims also. And seems like you're the one, like, oh, I didn't even think about it. And I'm like, dude, like that, I don't care about the projection of the games. I care about the projections of the contests. So it's like, once you could meld them together and just tell me, if I could just type, even if you don't give me the output, like let's say you did it in a way where you're not giving away the house, where you could incorporate it would have to, lineup HQ would have to be like kind of rejiggered in order for it to happen, is that any lineup that you spit out in lineup HQ on Roto Grinders, and it would say mean projection, ownership sum, and then the expected value of the lineup, right? Because you have all the lineups in your database and what their dollar amount is. So you're not going to show and say, here are 5,000 lineups ordered by this type. So if you want to play lineup number 1, like you don't have, but you have a table that exists like that. And it's just like, you build the lineups like that, and I'll tell you what your expected, return in this contest of that lineup is. So it doesn't feel like, so people can still make mistakes, right? People can still make mistakes, and then you could. I know I'm going. I'm getting all excited about a system,
right? Because that's the kind of thing you have to think about with this stuff. Is obviously if you give out, you can't give out lineups to begin with, but if people are playing the same lineup and it's getting duplicated, well, now the expected value isn't what it used to be. Solely because your product exists. And that's the kind of thing I'm thinking about, even on a more basic level with these ownership projections. It's like, okay, well, let's say these ownership projections come out and they do wind up being really good. And I build, a tool, like a basic tool that like tells you, okay, this is the best leverage stack today because it's going to be low owned. And everyone sees it's going to be low owned. And now all of a sudden, because they see that, they're going to play it and the ownership's going to be wrong because people are looking at the low owner.
That happens dude. That happens all the time. On Slate IQ, Slate IQ will look and go, it looks like the Twins are way under owned today. And then I go to like Awesemo and I look at their top stacks tool. It's like, it looks like Minnesota's going to be way under owned today. And then next thing you know, Minnesota's like second highest owned stack. And it's like, exactly. Because everyone saw that they were under owned, that it moved everyone's ownership up on them.
Yeah. So that's the toughest part of doing ownership, I think, is like accounting for that kind of like game within the game, like game theory type stuff. It's just people have some idea of who's going to be owned and they react to it, and that changes the ownership. So It's just, there's only so much you can account for, but that's something I'm definitely thinking about.
So is there anything else new in the bat? Anything that people should know?
I mean, that's the main thing. The ownership's the biggest new thing. Obviously, there's adjustments for Camden Yards, for Universal DH, for the double headers, for like anything that's like, going to happen in baseball this year. Like there's, going to be an adjustment for it. Still debating if there's going to be adjustment for any of these humidors. Petco would be the one in particular. Still kind of doing some research on that. But otherwise, I mean, it's the bat I think is the best system available. There's it's already really, really good. Doesn't need to be a whole lot of other upgrades. The biggest upgrade that's coming is the pitchers, which will happen at some point. The pitcher StatCast stuff, but otherwise,
with this, Derek, you also get the statistical projections.
Yeah, you mean like the categories? Like this guy projects for like a 52% chance of getting a win today, and
right, and home runs and doubles, and I mean you have all the columns because there are a lot of people that in our you also have the Discord, right? And if you're in the Roto Grinders Discord, we have the Bat channel, which tends to be a decent channel for behavior-wise.
People, users hang out in there. I answer questions. Some of the long-term veteran guys answer questions. It's a really good place to be.
But you could also use the statistical projections to bet on props for sports betting.
Yes, you can. You can definitely do that. If you want to make betting props really easy, the Bat works with the sports betting tools over at EV Analytics, where you can look at the Bat's projection on any category, compare it to basically any sports book you want. You can find where the biggest discrepancies are, between the books, which projections have the biggest discrepancies, between the betting line, and you can bet it that way. That's actually, I think, the easiest way to do it, because it compares it all right to the betting lines.
That's an extra charge that you have to pay for that.
Yeah, it's a separate website. It's their own tools that it works with. So yeah, it's a separate subscription over there.
But I mean, if you wanted to do it even if you didn't want to do that, if you wanted to do it the more manual way, you could just bring up the Bat statistical projections and just go, let me go to DraftKings Sportsbook and see what the home run lines are. And then you compare the line. I mean, you could also download the the CSV of the Bat stuff you could download yourself also.
Yes.
And do whatever the hell you want. Like convert this to American odds and whatever. If you're an Excel wizard and you do a whole bunch of stuff and you want to incorporate the Bat, I know tons of sharp players that take the Bat data and incorporate into their own models and their own simulations. So it's not like this type of thing where you have to manually write stuff that or cut and paste. It's like you give the CSVs and everything that you could download.
Yeah, that's all there for you. You get basically all the data you could want. You can download it. You can do whatever you want with it. And yeah.
What more is there to ask for?
I don't think there's a whole lot more. I think it's a pretty good deal.
I think it's a very good deal. $399.99, $400. Fine, just say $400. Why not? It's old school days. Oh, I'm gonna save a pen. Oh, it looks cheaper. Whatever. Rotogrinders.com/the-bat. It's available now, and the Discord is open. Yeah, it's available now, right? People could buy that now, right?
Yep, it's available.
Right. There's no early bird special or anything.
No. Just this is the price this year. We will have a monthly and a daily option starting on opening day, if anyone wants to do it that way. But you will get a better deal just buying the season long. Right,
and I eat my own dog food, right? I mean, it's not my dog food, but I know that this was a pseudo 1 hour infomercial on the Bat, but it is what I use. So when I play, this is what I use. So if I do badly, that means everyone else is going to do, right? So if you're going to do badly with the Bat, I'm going to do badly with the Bat. But it's not just the numbers. You obviously have to use, build good lineups. You still have to involve game theory involved.
Yeah, but it's not going to tell you what to do. You need to do smart things with it. But you're starting from basically, I think, the best system that's available.
And you can follow Derek Carty at Derek Carty on Twitter. I know you'll probably make the rounds on other podcasts. With baseball season coming around, people are like, oh, what's going on with it? You'd probably answer the same questions that I've asked, right? What's going on with the Orioles?
We get to talk about the really in-depth stuff, and you push me about, okay, what's exactly going into these ownership projections? This is always one of the best ones to be on.
Well, you have to expect that. You knew I wasn't going to just let you slide with it's a black box. Get the fuck out of here. Like you could tell someone from an ESPN podcast or something that's like, I ain't counting the balance. Like, no, I actually understand this shit. Fucking, I want to know that you're not just making this shit up, right? The black box is, yeah, it's a random number generator, right? Like something like that. And we'll just, hey, it has a 0.27 R. Who gives a fuck, right? What does it matter?
Yeah. No, I'd like to think people understand at this point with how good the bat and the blitz are, that anything.
Oh, will you do NFL ownership if the MLB ownership works?
Yeah, that's the plan.
Okay. But still, people will still ask if you're going to be doing the bounce or the puck or the board, right?
Yeah.
And you'll still give the answer of if you did any projection system for another sport, it's probably going to be golf.
Yeah, it might be golf. I have a rudimentary F1 projection system that I've been using for like my home fantasy leagues the last year or two that I'm thinking about putting out there, but it's not like the same quality as the bat or the blitz, so I don't know if I'm going to do that or not.
Well, people seem to be in F1 DFS, at least for now. We see this all the time with these little things. Like 3 months from now, the F1 prize pools will be down to like fucking $5,000 or something.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I like F1. I really like F1. So, if I ever decide, okay, I want to make these a little bit better, maybe I'll think about selling them.
Okie doke. So, get the bat. And as always, you can always get the Theory of Daily Fantasy Sports. 15-hour audio DFS masterclass. You can pick up at theoryofdfs.com.